that it is the worst time to buy a house right now. Hi YouTube, it's Yashi. Lately my feed has been pretty much flooded with all negative information about the housing market, how we're gonna have a crash, how everything is coming down, and most YouTubers, except for one, are pretty much saying the same thing. If you're wondering who the one-man army is, it's Dave Ramsey. Well, today I'm here to be the second, yet smaller size YouTuber who's gonna side by him to fight all the rest. I'm gonna add a little bit more of technical analysis compared to his more psychological argument. But before we start, please like and subscribe to support the channel, as well as the future project I have, which is a non-profit focused on housing, and more into that in the future. Dave Ramsey's stance on pro-house focuses a lot on the fact that instead of paying somebody rent, you're paying yourself in equity. Sort of like putting money into a savings account, instead of burning it through rental payments. And this is probably one of the most valid arguments out there when it comes to buying a house, as the matter of fact is that you're buying a house no matter what. You're simply choosing whether you're buying a house for yourself or for a landlord by paying the rent, which includes the mortgage on his property and some extra cash that he's keeping in his pocket. But here is where it gets a little bit more technical. While most YouTubers are focused more on one side of the data set to convince you that we're gonna go through something like the 2008 recession that everybody went through, I'm here to paint the full picture. And if you look at it, the situation seems to be quite the opposite. Let me ask you a question. Why do you think a Supreme shirt is more expensive than a normal Walmart shirt? Yes, quality can have an effect, but it's mostly a formula deriving from supply and demand, pumped up by marketing. Supreme marketed itself very well, and then took the supply and demand formula and made the best out of it. If 10,000 people wanted one of their shirts, instead of supplying 10,000 shirts, they chose to supply only 100 for a markup price. In some cases, even ridiculous amounts. Because if you have 10,000 people wanting 100 shirts, those 10,000 people are willing to pay more for that, to snatch one. A Walmart shirt, on the other hand, there are more of these shirts for sale than people wanting to buy them, so Walmart is kind of forced to drop prices to incentivize people to buy them. Oh Yashi, why are you talking about rents? This has nothing to do with home prices. Well, it actually does. This is the same reason that led to the high home prices that we saw during the COVID, as we had builders not building enough homes for the demand that we had out there, sellers not wanting to sell their homes, and this high influx of buyers pushed by the super low interest rate wanting to snatch a house and overbidding on pretty much anything. But then stuff changed. Fast forward to mid-2022, we saw interest rates doubling compared to what we had before, and sellers trying to get rid of their properties as quickly as possible to lock some good profits. And this flooding of homes for sale is pretty much the main argument that YouTubers used. Median YouTubers were saying that these higher interest rates were making homes so unaffordable, and that the higher amount of homes coming into the market because sellers wanted to get rid of them as quickly as possible, as they had PTSD from 2008. And as a consequence, homes would become kind of like the Walmart shirt, where you would have too many homes for sale and buyers backing off from the market, that sellers would be forced to drop their prices to incentivize people to come back and buy. And this was pretty much the reason for them to say that it is the worst time to buy a house right now. Well, all these predictions actually did not really happen. Yes, supply went up, but if you look back in the past 2 years, it's still less than pre-pandemic. Go back 10, and the trend is terrifying. Fortune mentioned how demand is down 30% a few weeks ago, meaning that there's 30% less buyers than there were last year. But it's not enough to offset the super low amount of homes that are for sale right now. On top of all this, rents, because of inflation, went so high that renters that want to get rid of that trap, that financial trap that is getting money out of their pocket, still want to find a way to buy a house. Anyway, why do I believe that it's still a perfect time to buy one? When headlines about inflation, the economy and everything seems to be very negative and bad, we're starting to see some data and some positive silver lining that is kind of pointing towards the opposite compared to what you read around. Let's start with home supply. As I said earlier, inventory has been going up pretty much during the mid of 2022 until it halted and stalled towards August, September of 2022. Well, October data just came out, especially on Redfin, and you can see that inventory is starting to go down again. So on top of not reaching pre-pandemic levels, it's starting to follow its historical trend again of going lower and lower and lower. In other words, if this trend continues, there will be less and less homes for sale in the future, meaning that there will be a stronger competition to snatch those remaining homes for sale and a harder time for home buyers. Now, mortgage rates are still keeping the demand side low because it's so expensive to get a mortgage now, and these rates are making your monthly payment very expensive. But something is about to start changing there too. In November 2022, the Fed, after raising interest rates by another 0.75 basis points, started unexpected some new factors. Mr. Powell, the most important person in the US economy right now, as whenever he speaks the markets go up and down, started to mention how they're gonna take in consideration now the lagging effect of monetary policy. In other words, whenever the Fed decides to move around with their interest rates or do any kind of monetary policy, the effect of that policy is not immediate. There is some kind of lag between their choice and what will happen. It takes a few months. So he basically started to say that they will start taking this into consideration. He then played it safe by saying that there's still a lot of room to increase interest rates, which of course is understandable, as his incentive is to keep everybody with a low sentiment is still pretty pessimistic. If we have euphoria, we gotta go back into where we were a year ago. Well then, fast forward a few days after this meeting by the Fed, and we got the CPI report, namely the inflation report showing year-to-year and month-to-month change in inflation across different consumer products. This one here turned out to be better than what the market expected. Inflation in October of this year compared to last year was 7.7%, and the market expected 7.9%. And here's the thing, as I mentioned in my pre-CPI report video that I made the day before the CPI report, you can check it right here. I mentioned that there are many factors that not only are decreasing in prices, but they're literally falling off a cliff. For example, freight costs, which dropped 70% in some places. A container from China to America used to be 9.5 grand, now it's around 2. Many of these factors started to kick in last month and started having, I believe, some effects on the October CPI report, which was released in November. Remember, there's always 1 month of lag. However, I believe that it will have a super large impact on the next CPI report we will get in December, which will start to signal to the Fed that something is changing. And exactly for the same reason, after the CPI report that we saw a few days ago, most mortgages, the 30-year mortgage, dropped from a 10-year high of 7.3% interest on a 30-year mortgage to under 7%. And this is pretty much the first time we saw such a large drop in interest rates of mortgages this year. So the sentiment seems to be changing too. Now to my opinion. Remember, this is not financial advice, this is just my opinion. Always do your research. Markets are starting to feel a little bit of a sentiment change. And if sentiment goes from extreme volatility to a more stable environment, on top of the Fed maybe starting to slow down pace or even stall and remain stable, this could start setting up a foundation for home prices to go through another super bull run again. If buyers start being more comfortable, on top of getting used with a new mortgage status quo of higher mortgage rates, they will flood this market that, as we aforementioned before, has even more of a scarce supply than before, creating an effect sort of like the Supreme t-shirts we were talking about earlier. If the Fed even pivots and start bringing down interest rates, this effect could be even stronger, and I believe this would be like a boom run that we saw during the pandemic. And exactly because of this, I believe that once the Fed starts stalling, they will remain at the level they reached for a while just to see what happens with the market and demand. Given this information, I believe that this is the perfect time to buy a house, because it is the time right before people go from fearful to more comfortable. Because once they get comfortable, they start flooding the market again. Buying now means also to take advantage of scared sellers. Again, most media and YouTubers have been creating panic across the whole world, not only from a buyer's perspective, but also from a seller's perspective. Sellers who were used to days on the market around 10 days to sell a house are now seeing 15, 20 days on the market, which, although it's still under the average days on the market, it's still double to what they used to have before. This is why a smart seller, in my opinion, could be placing multiple offers, of course with contingencies, where they either offer a lower price or add some inspection contingencies, and we saw many homes for sale without inspection contingencies in the past 2 years, or play some, let's say, numbers game where they ask for seller credits, something like this, to lower their mortgage costs. So basically, in a time where everybody's fearful, you have a little bit more of bargaining power if you're a home buyer. You just need to take advantage of it and not be fearful. And for the same exact reason, after selling my house at the beginning of November, I just flipped a home. If you have been following me on TikTok and YouTube, I'm still looking for new homes to buy and to invest in. So to conclude, we might see fewer and fewer homes for sale in the future. There is a silver positive lining from a Fed and inflation perspective, and sellers are scared more than ever before as they have PTSD from the 2008 crisis, enabling smart buyers to get discounts or some extra contingencies to bring them in an upper situation. Mix that with Dave Ramsey's opinion about increasing your wealth instead of paying rent to somebody else, and yes, you just created the perfect moment to actually buy a house. Let me know what you think, guys. Ciao!